Last time on this channel, we made a very serious claim that we found the grave of Robert Leroy Parker, aka the world-famous Western outlaw Butch Cassidy. I'm about to show you some of the evidence that supports this claim and the work that's presently happening to prove it. And that starts right now. On June 27th of this year, 2024, with the permission of the Parker family and local authorities, we recovered a DNA sample from the remains of a man identified as Robert Parker. The DNA analysis is currently underway, and we are waiting for the results. Today, I'm going to show you a few clips from that DNA recovery dig, but what I want to say first is that even without the DNA, the historical record is clear. Every piece of evidence that we've uncovered indicates that the Robert Parker in the grave is in fact Robert Leroy Parker, the man known to history as Butch Cassidy. Watch this. You might be asking yourself, like I did, why didn't someone with more expertise, more experience, discover this first?
I'll tell you. I don't know.
It's a good question. I do have a few theories, and it starts in Hollywood.
Raindrops are falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed.
In 1969, Robert Redford and Paul Newman starred alongside Kathrine Ross in what has become the famous movie The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy. Or was it that? Originally, the movie was to be called The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy, but a savvy producer suggested the much better name Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And thus was born the legend of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Not in 1890 or 1892, but in 1969. More often, historical newspapers referred to this group of outlaws as the Logan Gang after Harvey Logan, or the Robbers Roost Gang, or less common, the Wild Bunch. So who was Butch Cassidy? Let's break it down. First, let's talk about aliases. And you might think that aliases or assumed names are a thing of the past, but it's good to remember that in American culture, aliases are alive and well. Mr. Beast, for instance, whose real name is James Donaldson, or the actor Jamie Foxx, whose real name is Eric Marlin Bishop. And what alias does Reginald Kenneth Dwight use? That's Elton John. And while these aliases today are primarily used for privacy and for marketing, I don't think you'll be surprised to learn that in the Wild West they were also used for privacy and occasionally for marketing. Butch Cassidy is an alias, just like Mark Sinclair uses the name Vin Diesel, if you didn't know. Now, most Wild West researchers believe that Butch Cassidy's real name was Robert Leroy Parker. He also went by Bob Parker, naturally, and most people don't know that there was another alias, George Cassidy. For this video, I'm going to stick with three names: Robert Leroy Parker, George Cassidy, and Butch Cassidy. And thinking about it now, George Cassidy and the Sundance Kid doesn't quite have the same vibe. First, let's talk about Robert. Robert Leroy Parker was born April 13th, 1866 to newlyweds Max and Ann Parker. They are Mormon immigrants from Lancashire, England. They sailed across the ocean with their parents in 1856 and on the order of Brigham Young went south to Beaver, Utah to settle a new area. And you can look here in the 1870 census where he's shown and listed under his mother as a young boy. Later, his family moved over the hill to an even smaller town in today's standards called Circleville. Sometime in his early teens, Robert Parker left his home and ran into other cowboys and outlaws like Tom McCarty and Matt Warner. he wound up in Colorado, where he stole a few horses, probably some cows, and was put into prison. Max, his father, came and bailed him out. He also helped rob the San Miguel Bank in June of 1889. He was identified as one of the robbers alongside Tom McCarty and Matt Warner and a few others. And this is where Robert Parker leaves us. Probably gets smart as an outlaw, starts using an alias. In 1894, a man named George Cassidy shows up in Thermopolis, Wyoming. He, along with a buddy Al Hainer, were cowpunchers and were accused by a cattle baron of stealing horses. After a short, probably unfair trial, Al Hainer got off the hook, and George Cassidy was sentenced to 2 years in the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Laramie, Wyoming. And you know this picture. It was taken as a mugshot in the Wyoming State Penitentiary, the Wyoming Territorial Prison State Historical Site. It's a big mouthful and a really cool place to go see if you want to know more about Butch Cassidy. George Cassidy went to prison on July 15th, 1894, but he was pardoned a year and a half later on January 16th, 1896, by Wyoming Governor William Richards, who was convinced that George Cassidy had reformed. The two important elements to remember here is that he was pardoned in January of 1896, and that he went to jail as George Cassidy, and he was pardoned as George Cassidy. Now let's talk about Butch. Yes, Butch Cassidy. About 8 months after George Cassidy was released from prison, a few men showed up at the Montpelier Bank in Montpelier, Idaho. That's in the very southeast corner of the state. They ordered staff to lie on the floor and proceeded to steal $7,160. That's the equivalent of about $230,000 today, and rode off into the sunset. Or actually, they rode east into the sunrise. Now, was that Butch Cassidy? No. Actually, the newspapers eventually landed on George Cassidy, alias Butch. Now, this is the first time Butch was mentioned. But prior to that, they had the identities of the men wrong altogether, accused the wrong group of men. A month later, and 250 miles to the south in the good state of Utah, Butch Cassidy finally makes his official appearance. And where is that, you ask? Loa, Wayne County, Utah. Yeah, you're probably going to have to look that up on a map. It's a very small town in the center part of the state. I'm going to read the account from the Salt Lake Herald at the time, the historical newspaper, because in my opinion, it's better than fiction. And just a small point here. In the fall of 1896, when Butch Cassidy arrives in Wayne County, Utah, there's another man who lives within about a mile of where Butch Cassidy appears. His name, if you've been following the podcast at all, is William Henry Long. Now, there are a few reports in newspapers about this appearance. First, Butch Cassidy goes to the Blackburn farm and asks for a newspaper and a report about the Montpelier Bank robbery. And then he shows up at the hotel in Loa and runs into a man named Joe Decker, a traveling man. Joe Decker leaves Loa and goes west about 45 miles to a town called Richfield, reports his encounter to the local sheriff, which in turn gets to the newspapers. September 16th, Joe Decker, a traveling man, has arrived here from Wayne County. He says he met two men over there who were buying cattle. One said to him, "Mr. Decker, I am Butch Cassidy, the notorious outlaw. In a little while, we will go back to Vernal, where any officer with a warrant may arrest either of us with no trouble. I have led a reckless life as of late years, and would do Matt Warner any good I could, but I had nothing to do with the Montpelier Bank robbery." Butch then showed Decker what he could do with a rifle, and said he would surrender to any peace officer who came without a posse. Many people believe that the Montpelier Bank robbery was basically so that Butch Cassidy could acquire the funds to get Matt Warner out of prison in Ogden, Utah. If you already know some of the history, you know that Butch Cassidy's next robbery was the Castlegate Mining Company about 40 miles north of Wayne County. And later the train holdups at Wilcox and Tipton, Wyoming in 1899 and 1900 respectively. But if you believe Hollywood, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, along with Sundance's girlfriend, escape to South America in 1901.
And now you know the rest of the story.
How much evidence is there that Robert Parker and Harry Longabaugh, that's the accepted name for the Sundance Kid, along with Etta Place, went to South America? And I have to concede that there is good evidence that there were American outlaws in Argentina and Bolivia and Chile. Whether or not those men were Robert Parker and Harry Longabaugh is a much more difficult rumor to prove. Now, here is the down and dirty of this whole story. Butch Cassidy was an alias for a real man. Maybe that man was Robert Parker. History says that that's true. But we are uncovering DNA evidence right now that calls into question whether that man was the man that went to South America. And that could change the story dramatically. And look, we know that we could be wrong here. According to the forensics company, we still have at least another month. We're hoping it's a few weeks. When that evidence comes back from the forensics company, we still have to compare it to matches that we have from the Parker family to find out whether or not this man was really Robert Leroy Parker. But it will be the truth, the scientific forensic truth. And we'll report it right here. So what's next? We want to announce a treasure hunt of sorts. An outlaw treasure hunt. At the beginning of this video, I told you that there was significant evidence outside of DNA that supports our conclusion that the Robert Parker in the grave is actually Robert Leroy Parker. And that's true. But if I just told you this evidence, you may or may not believe me. Next week, I'm going to publish a video that has all the clues you'll need to find the story yourself. Take the clues, discover the story, and find out whether our research is accurate or not. Just in case you missed the first video where we announced that we'd found the grave of Robert Parker, you can find that right here. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.